At Sunday dinner, my husband was arguing about football with my grandson, while my stepdaughter, my grandson's mother, stood in the kitchen wearing a strange smile. Then suddenly, my grandson slipped a thick envelope into my pocket and whispered, "Don't open it here, Grandma. Don't let my mother see." That night, I opened the envelope and froze when I saw a copied blueprint of the hidden compartment I had built for a millionaire 6 years earlier, along with a handwritten note. "They've already been inside your workshop." In that moment, I knew I didn't have time to pretend everything was normal anymore. Before we go any further, I am so grateful you are here. It genuinely means something to me. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your country, your city? I want to know. A quick note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but what it points to is worth thinking about. I've spent 40 years building walls for other people. Hidden compartments, false panels, magnetic latches behind decorative molding. I know how to make things disappear inside a room and leave no trace. What I didn't know on the last Sunday of September 2025 was that someone had been studying every wall I ever built and was about to use that knowledge against me. It started the way it always does. Pot roast in the oven, football on TV, and my husband Daniel arguing with our grandson Tyler about the Patriots, like the outcome of the season depended personally on the two of them reaching an agreement. "Brady's gone, Daniel. You have to let it go," Tyler said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a 22-year-old who thinks he understands loss. "Tom Brady has nothing to do with this," Daniel shot back, pointing his fork like a lecturer making a point. "This is about the offensive line, fundamentals. You don't win games with fundamentals like that. You don't win games by complaining about fundamentals from a couch in Westport either." Daniel looked at me across the table. "Maggie, back me up here." "I think the pot roast is excellent," I said. Tyler laughed. Daniel muttered something about being outnumbered, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like any other Sunday. That was when I noticed Claudia. She was standing at the kitchen counter, refilling the bread basket, her back half turned to the table. And she was doing something I had never once seen her do in 22 years of Sunday dinners. She was completely still, not relaxed still the way people are when they're comfortable. Frozen still the way people are when they're listening for something. "Claudia," I said, "come sit down. The bread can wait." She turned around with that smile, the one that arrived a half second too late to be natural. "Just finishing up. You cooked everything. The least I can do is help clean." "You're not cleaning, you're refilling." "Maggie," she laughed lightly, "let me do something useful." I watched her carry the basket back to the table. Tyler had gone quiet. Just slightly the way young men go quiet when they're trying not to look at something. I filed that away. After dinner, Daniel was in the living room with the game on low, half asleep in the way he pretends isn't sleeping. Tyler was clearing the last of the dishes, and Claudia had gone to the front hallway to get her coat. I was at the sink rinsing glasses when Tyler came up behind me, leaned past me to set a stack of plates down, and said under his breath, so low I felt the words more than heard them, "Don't react." I kept rinsing. "I'm not reacting. I need to give you something. Not here. When you're getting your coat." "Aw, Tyler. Please." The word came out thin, stretched. Not a request. A plea. I set down the glass I was holding and looked at him properly. His jaw was tight. His eyes kept cutting toward the hallway where Claudia was standing. "Okay," I said quietly, "when I get my coat." It happened fast. Claudia called out to Daniel about something the time the drive home, and Daniel's voice came back from the living room, and for 12 seconds, maybe 15, Tyler was behind me helping me into my coat, and Claudia's back was turned. His hand moved to the interior pocket on my left side. I felt the weight land thick rectangular, the stiff edges of an envelope with something substantial inside. His fingers pressed against my arm once quick before he stepped back. "Don't open it here," he said, voice barely above nothing. "Not tonight. Not while she's still in the house." He paused. "You have 24 hours, Grandma Maggie." Then Claudia turned around. "All set?" she asked, looking at us both. "All set," I said. She smiled. Tyler smiled. I buttoned my coat over the secret he had just placed next to my heart, and I smiled too. In the car, Daniel reached over and turned the radio on. Springsteen. Something slow. "Good dinner," he said. "Thank you." Tyler seemed quiet tonight. "He's 22, I said. "They're always somewhere else in their heads." Daniel nodded, satisfied with that, and merged onto the highway. I pressed my right hand flat against the inside of my coat and felt the envelope underneath the wool. Thick. Heavy. Whatever was inside it, Tyler had been afraid to give it to me in front of his mother. That told me more than the envelope itself. We were almost home when Daniel glanced over. "You're quiet, too." "Just tired," I said. He accepted that. He always accepts that. Daniel Holloway is a good man, and good men sometimes make the mistake of believing the people they love when they say they're fine. I wasn't fine. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my own car with my hand pressed against a secret my grandson was too scared to hand me at a dinner table. And the only reason I could think of for that kind of fear was sitting in the back seat of a car, 2 miles behind us, heading home in the opposite direction. We pulled into our driveway on Birchwood Lane at 8:43. Daniel went inside ahead of me to turn on the lights. Daniel was asleep before I even made it back downstairs. 22 years of marriage, and the man still falls asleep like a light switch, 1 minute sitting up, next minute gone. I used to find it charming. That night, I was grateful for it. I sat down at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me and the small counter lamp on. I didn't open it right away. I just looked at it. The handwriting on the outside, the notation in the lower left corner that made my chest go tight every time my eyes landed on it. Then I opened it. Inside was a technical drawing of the Whitmore safe. My drawing, my measurements, my shorthand notation, my hinge placement. 6 years ago, I had built that compartment with my own hands inside a Greenwich mansion, and now someone had put a copy of its blueprint in an envelope and handed it to my grandson to deliver to me at a Sunday dinner table. I pulled the loop from the kitchen drawer. I keep one. There, the same way other people keep scissors, an old habit from the trade, and I also grabbed my UV pen light. Every original drawing I produce gets a small, invisible ink mark in the lower right corner, my version of a signature that clients never see. I clicked the light on and held it over the corner of the drawing. Nothing. "Okay," I said out loud, "so that's how it is. Not my original. A copy. And not just any copy. Whoever made it had missed the directional mark I put in the lower left corner of every blueprint. In my originals, that mark always runs right to left. On this drawing, it ran the wrong way, mirrored. The kind of mistake you make when you scan something and don't understand what you're looking at. I was still holding the pen light when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, squinting. "Maggie, it's almost 11. I flipped the drawing face down with one hand. "Couldn't sleep." He looked at me, then at the table, then back at me. Daniel Holloway spent 30 years as an accountant. He knows when numbers don't add up. "What are you looking at?" "Old project files." "At 11 o'clock on a Sunday." Inspiration strikes when it strikes Daniel. He walked to the cabinet, took out a glass, filled it at the sink. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Tyler seemed off tonight." I kept my voice even. "Did he—" Quiet. Kept looking at Claudia like he was waiting for something. He turned around, leaned against the counter. "You notice that Tyler's 22. He's always waiting for something." "Maggie." "Daniel." He set the glass down. "Is something going on?" And there it was. The question I wasn't ready to answer yet, not because I wanted to lie to him, but because I didn't have enough to tell him the truth. Not yet. "I'm working through something," I said carefully. "Give me a day." He looked at me for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum. "A day," he repeated. "1 day, then I'll tell you everything I know." He picked up his glass. "You've been saying that for 40 years every time a job gets complicated. And I've always told you eventually." "You have," he admitted. Then he came over, kissed the top of my head the way he has since our first year together, and said, "Don't stay up too late." He went back upstairs without pushing further. That's the thing about Daniel. He knows when to ask and when to wait. It's one of the reasons I married him. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I reached into the envelope again and found what I'd missed the first time, a small folded note, tucked flat against the back, easy to overlook. Tyler's handwriting, rushed, uneven. They already have what they need from your files. They just want you to open it. Don't trust what you hear inside this house. I'm sorry, Grandma Maggie. I set the note on the table and looked at it. Sorry for what, Tyler, I said quietly. Sorry for bringing me into this, or sorry for whatever you already did before tonight. No answer, just the refrigerator and the dark house and the drawing on the table in front of me. I picked up the penlight again and held it over the Whitmore blueprint one more time, not because I expected the UV mark to appear, but because I needed to confirm what I already knew. The original was still somewhere. In my workshop, in my flat file cabinet behind the false panel on the east wall. Whoever made this copy had been good enough to fool anyone who didn't know my system, but they hadn't been good enough to fool me. I thought about the safe itself. 6 years since I'd built it. 2-layer lock mechanism. The first layer follows the blueprint, exactly the kind of thing you could reverse engineer from a good scan. But the second layer was never written down anywhere. No drawings, no notes, no documentation. Just a specific pressure sequence and timing built into the mechanism by my hands, existing only in muscle memory, which meant whoever wanted inside that safe couldn't get there with a copied blueprint. They needed me. A live cooperative and standing in front of that wall. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I folded the drawing and put it back in the envelope. I turned off the counter lamp and sat in the dark kitchen for a while, thinking about my grandson's frightened handwriting and the smile on Claudia's face at dinner. Don't trust what you hear inside this house. The house was quiet. Daniel was asleep. Somewhere across Westport, Tyler was lying awake in whatever apartment he was renting this month, probably staring at the ceiling, waiting to find out what I was going to do next. I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever had been inside my workshop reading my files, copying my work, they'd made one mistake. They'd left me the copy instead of the original. And that meant they still needed something only I could give them. Tomorrow I was going to find out what Tyler was too afraid to tell me at that dinner table. I texted Tyler at 7 in the morning. 4 words, Pete's back lot. 9. He knew what Pete's was. Garland's Lumber and Hardware on Route 1 in Norwalk. I'd been buying materials there since before Tyler was born. Pete Garland, the owner, was one of those men who'd been in the same building, doing the same job for 30 years, and had somehow become a fixed point in the universe because of it. He opened at 8, closed at 6, never took vacation, and kept a small paved lot behind the store where deliveries came in. Quiet off the main road, no reason for anyone to look twice at 2 people having a conversation next to a stack of hardwood panels. Tyler's reply came back in under a minute. Okay, same as last night. 1 word, no punctuation. I was starting to understand that was how Tyler communicated when he was scared. He was already there when I pulled in, sitting on the tailgate of Pete's delivery truck with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup jacket zipped to the chin, even though the morning wasn't that cold. He looked like he hadn't slept. I parked, got out, and stood in front of him without sitting down. Start from the beginning, I said, and don't leave anything out. Tyler looked at the ground. Grandma Maggie. Tyler, look at me. He looked up. I found the note. I said, I saw the drawing. I know it's a copy, and I know someone was in my workshop. What I don't know is why, and that's the part you're going to tell me right now. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a breath that had clearly been sitting in his chest since last night. My mother came to me 3 weeks ago, he said. She said there was something inside the Whitmore safe, a recording, something Mr. Whitmore made before he died. She said if that recording gets played at the probate hearing on November 15th, she goes to prison. I kept my face still. What kind of recording? A conversation between her and Mr. Whitmore. Tyler turned the coffee cup in his hands. She pressured him into changing his will. He recorded it. She didn't know until after he died, and someone told her about the safe. Who told her? I don't know. She didn't say. And she wants me to open the safe before the hearing, privately. Just you and her. She wants the recording gone before anyone else hears it. He finally looked at me directly. She said you're the only one who can open it. that the lock has 2 layers, and the second one, nobody can get through it without you. I thought about the pressure sequence built into that mechanism. 6 years ago, standing in the Whitmore study with a flashlight and a rubber mallet calibrating the timing by feel, because there was no way to write it down accurately. Some things live only in the hands. Why didn't she come to me herself? I asked. Tyler's jaw tightened, because she knew you'd say no. So she needed leverage first. There it was. The money, I said. He closed his eyes. The $31,000 I borrowed last year. For tuition and rent when my financial aid fell through. She said she'd show Grandpa Daniel the texts, arrange them to look like I was running some kind of scam on him. She has screenshots of every message. He opened his eyes. I know how it looks. I know I should have. Stop apologizing, I said, and tell me the rest. She gave me the envelope and told me to deliver it to you at dinner last night. She said it would make you understand the situation. He paused. She said if you cooperated, the recording disappears. The hearing goes her way and she leaves everyone alone. Fresh start. And if I don't cooperate? It wasn't a question. Tyler answered it anyway. Then Tyler's a thief, and Grandpa Daniel finds out. And whatever else she has, I don't know what else she has Grandma Maggie, but she implied there was more. I walked to the edge of the lot and stood there for a moment looking at the back of the hardware store. Through the loading bay door, I could see Pete inside moving between shelves, doing what he'd done every Monday morning for 30 years. Steady, predictable, honest. I turned back around. The hearing on November 15th, I said. Tell me exactly what she said about it. The probate court is reviewing the will. When someone contests an estate, the court schedules a hearing to evaluate all the evidence, documents, testimony, whatever's in the safe. The executor has to open it that day in front of everyone. Tyler shifted on the tailgate. She said if the recording plays in that courtroom, it proves she coerced Mr. Whitmore. Fraud, coercion, she used the word prison, Grandma Maggie. Not just losing the money, prison. So this isn't about inheritance, I said slowly. It's about evidence. She wants to destroy the evidence before the court can hear it. I looked at my grandson, 22 years old, dark circles under his eyes, holding a coffee that had probably gone cold 20 minutes ago, and I felt something that was equal parts anger and grief. Not at him. At the situation he'd been dropped into by a woman who should have protected him instead of armed herself with him. Go home, I said. Don't tell her we met. What are you going to do? I'm going to think. I picked up my keys. Tyler, did she say anything about my workshop, about being inside it? He hesitated. Just half a second. But I've been reading hesitations for 40 years. She borrowed Daniel's key, he said quietly. 3 weeks ago when he was sick. She said she was dropping something off, but she was in there for almost an hour, Grandma Maggie. I stood very still. An hour, I said. I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. I didn't know what she was looking for until she gave me the envelope. I nodded once, got in my car, backed out of the lot without saying another word. An hour in my workshop. Enough time to find the flat file cabinet. Enough time to locate the Whitmore drawings. Enough time to scan everything and leave no trace, or almost no trace. Almost. I needed to check the workshop right now, because if Claudia had been in there for an hour with a phone and a flashlight, there was one more thing I needed to know. Whether she'd found the hinge. I have always believed that a room remembers what happens inside it. Not in any mystical sense, I am not a person given to mystical thinking, but wood holds humidity changes. Dust holds footprints. A well-made cabinet holds the memory of every hand that has opened it, in the micro scratches on the hardware, in the faint compression of the wood fibers around the pull, in the thousandth of an inch variations that accumulate over time like a record no one thought to keep. I had built my entire career on reading those records. I had taught 2 apprentices to read them, too. I thought about that on the drive back from Pete's lot. The morning was cold and flat, the kind of October cold that has given up trying to feel like fall and has started feeling like what comes after. I kept both hands on the wheel and the radio off and let the road do what roads do when you need to think, give you something neutral to look at while everything else arranges itself. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already decided what I was going to find. The workshop is a converted outbuilding at the back of our property, separated from the house by a flagstone path and a row of arborvitae that Daniel planted the year we moved in and that have since grown tall enough to block the neighbor's sightline. I had added the deadbolt myself in 2017, a 5-pin Medeco with a restricted keyway that I had never copied. The only 2 keys in existence were on my ring and in the lockbox in my bedroom closet. The door was locked when I arrived. That meant nothing. A good entry leaves no trace at the lock. I had taught Sean that on his 3rd week using a tension wrench and a pick set I kept specifically for demonstration purposes. I had taught him that the goal was not speed, but invisibility, that the best entry was the one no one ever knew had happened. I unlocked the door and went in. The workshop smelled right. That was the first thing I checked, not with any instrument, just with the part of my brain that had cataloged this room for 30 years. Linseed oil oak dust. The faint metallic undertone of the bench vise, the particular dry warmth that the space heater maintained at 62 degrees year-round for the sake of the wood stock. Nothing chemical, nothing foreign, no trace of a cologne or a hand cream or the synthetic undertone that comes off certain synthetic gloves. Whoever had been here had been careful about that, too. I stood inside the door for a full minute without moving, looking at the room the way I looked at a new commission space, not searching for anything specific, just letting the whole of it register before the details broke it into pieces. Everything was in its place. The tool wall, the lumber rack, the flat file cabinet against the interior wall, the rolling stool beside the bench. The surface of the bench itself clear except for the set of chisels I had left drying after their last oiling. 1 chisel was out of alignment. 3 degrees, maybe 4. The rest were parallel. I crossed to the bench and looked at it without touching. The chisel was the one I used for detail work on interior hardware, narrow blade-weighted handle. The tool I reached for when I was working close to a finished surface and needed control over force. It was the tool someone would pick up to examine if they were trying to understand how I worked, if they were trying to learn something about my habits before attempting something that required precision. I left it where it was. The flat file cabinet held my commission archives, original drawings, measurements, installation notes, client correspondence. 5 drawers each labeled by year, each with a secondary lock that used a key separate from the workshop deadbolt. I had started the secondary lock system in 2015 after a client dispute that taught me the value of documented originals. Drawer 3 was the 2019 drawer. I crouched in front of it and looked at the keyhole under my bench lamp. A faint ring of micro-abrasion around the lower edge of the keyway, barely visible, the kind of mark a pick leaves when the operator is skilled, but not perfect. Someone had worked this lock. Someone who knew how to work it and had done so carefully enough that a casual inspection would have found nothing. I was not a casual inspector. I unlocked the drawer and opened it. The Whitmore folder was in the right position, 3rd from the front, where I kept active or recently referenced commissions. But the orientation of the folder tab was wrong. I filed with the tab, angled left. This one was straight up. A detail so small that most people would have dismissed it as their own carelessness. I had not filed that folder since 2020. I did not make that kind of carelessness. I opened the folder on the bench and went through every page. The commission letter was there. The materials invoice was there. The installation notes were there. The original compartment drawings, 3 sheets, cross-section, elevation, and detail were there. All present, all undisturbed on the surface. I held sheet 2 up to the bench lamp and looked at the paper itself. A faint rectangular shadow in the center of the page, slightly lighter than the surrounding paper, the kind of differential that photographic scanning leaves on matte paper under certain light conditions. Someone had laid this sheet flat on a scanner bed and photographed it directly. They had what they needed from this drawer. I went to the built-in cabinet on the north wall. This was the piece I was most concerned about, the one that held my hardware samples, my specialty lock components, and the demonstration compartment I had built in 2018 as a teaching model. The demonstration compartment was a 1/3 scale replica of a standard hidden panel installation, fully functional with the same 2-layer mechanism I used in high-security commissions, including the Whitmore installation. The cabinet exterior was undisturbed. I ran my fingers along the edge of the lower left panel, the access point for the demonstration compartment's primary lock, and felt nothing irregular. I measured the gap between the panel face and the cabinet frame. With my fingers, the original 4.2 millimeters I had set it to in 2018. Then I measured it with the digital calipers from my apron pocket. 4.5 millimeters. I set the calipers down on the bench and looked at the panel for a moment without moving. A 0.3 millimeter increase in gap tolerance at the primary panel. Face meant one of two things. Either the wood had shifted with humidity possible, though I maintained the workshop climate specifically to prevent it, or someone had opened the primary layer and closed it again, and the closure had not returned the panel to its exact original position. The humidity logs on my wall monitor showed no variation above 4% in the past 6 weeks. The wood had not shifted. Someone had opened the primary layer. I opened it myself, now following the sequence from muscle memory press, rotate, lift, slide, and looked inside at the demonstration mechanism. The primary lock components were in place. The secondary trigger plate was in place. The tension spring behind the false back panel was in place. And caught in the gap between the hinge barrel and the hinge leaf of the false back panel so small that it was visible only because I was looking for it with a lamp at the right angle, was a single black thread. Cotton, medium weight, the kind used in the lining of a jacket. I did not touch it. I looked at it for a long time. The hinge on the false back panel was the entry point to the secondary layer. It was not documented in any drawing, not referenced in any installation note, not visible from any angle during a normal inspection of the compartment. I had shown it to exactly 2 people in the course of my working life, and one of them had been dead since 2022. The other had left my workshop in 2021 owing me nothing and saying nothing, and I had let him go because I had believed that what I taught my apprentices belonged to them as much as to me. I closed the cabinet. I went to the bench and sat on the rolling stool and looked at my hands for a moment, the hands that had built the Whitmore compartment that had shown a 28-year-old where the hinge sat and how the secondary layer released and why the sequence mattered more than the strength behind it. He had been good. That was the worst part in a way. He had been genuinely good patient with materials, careful with measurements, the kind of apprentice who asked questions because he wanted to understand rather than because he wanted to finish faster. I had trusted that. I picked up my phone and called Pete. He answered on the second ring. "You found something." "I found the thread," I said, "and the scan marks on the drawings, and the gap differential." I paused. "Pete, was Sean Morrow in your store recently?" The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Maggie," Pete said, his voice dropping. "He was here 3 weeks ago, bought a humidity gauge and a set of Japanese pull saws." A pause. "And he asked about the Whitmore project by name." My hand tightened on the phone. "Tell me everything," I said, "every word." Pete called me at 6:47 in the morning. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table since 4, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, staring at the grain pattern on the oak tabletop I'd built 11 years ago. Daniel was still upstairs. I could hear him moving the slow shuffle of slippers on hardwood that told me his knee was bad again. I didn't call up to him. I didn't know what I would say. When my phone buzzed, Pete's name lit the screen, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "He's here," Pete said. No greeting, no preamble. "Sean Morrow just pulled into my back lot." I was already standing. "Don't let him leave." "Maggie." "Pete." My voice came out harder than I intended. "Please." There was a long pause. Then, "All right, but you better hurry." I drove the 12 minutes to Garland's Hardware in 9. The back lot was a narrow strip of gravel behind the store, lined with delivery pallets and stacks of reclaimed lumber I'd been buying from Pete for 30 years. Sean was leaning against a dark green pickup truck I didn't recognize, a paper coffee cup in one hand, his collar turned up against the October chill. He looked older. The jaw was sharper, the lines around his eyes deeper. but the way he stood weight, shifted left shoulders, slightly hunched, that was exactly the same. I'd spent 4 years watching that posture across a workbench. He saw me coming and didn't run. That surprised me. Maggie. He said my name carefully like it was fragile. Sean. I stopped 6 feet away, close enough to read his face, far enough to think clearly. You want to tell me why you were in my workshop? He looked down at his cup. I figured you'd know eventually. I'm not interested in eventually. I'm interested in right now, standing in Pete's parking lot at 7 in the morning. I crossed my arms. Start talking. He exhaled slowly, a white cloud in the cold air. I didn't take anything. I know you didn't take anything. You made a copy. I watched his jaw tighten. You photographed my drawings for the Whitmore compartment. The measurements, the hinge sequence, all of it. He didn't deny it. That told me everything. Why I asked, he finally looked up. His eyes were dark, tired, and underneath the exhaustion there was something I recognized. Shame. Real bone-deep shame. The kind you can't fake. She called me in February, he said. Claudia Holloway Reeves. I didn't know who she was at first, not really. She said she was related to a client of yours, that she needed some information about a project you'd completed back in 2019. She made it sound routine. Routine. I repeated the word flat. I know how that sounds. He rubbed the back of his neck. She said she just needed the dimensions, that she was trying to settle a family dispute over an estate, and a judge had asked about the compartment's construction. She said she'd already spoken to you. She hadn't. I know that now. His voice cracked slightly at the edge. By the time I realized she'd lied, I'd already sent the photographs. She had them. I stood very still. The gravel crunched under my boot as I shifted my weight, and somewhere behind me, a delivery truck rumbled past on the main road, but I barely heard it. What did she offer you? I asked. He hesitated, one beat too long. Sean, what did she give you? $12,000. He said it quietly, like volume could soften the number. I've been behind on the mortgage for 8 months. My wife doesn't know. I couldn't. He stopped himself, swallowed hard. It was $12,000, and I told myself it was just dimensions, just measurements, numbers on a page, not a secret. Not a secret. I heard my own voice go very quiet. Quiet is how I get when I'm most angry. Daniel knows that. Pete knows that. Apparently, Sean had forgotten. Sean, those measurements are how the compartment locks. The sequence, the angles, the tolerances, whoever has those drawings can manipulate the lock mechanism from the outside without ever touching the combination. Do you understand what you gave her? He stared at me. The color drained from his face slowly, the way water drains from a basin. She didn't tell you that part, I said. It wasn't a question. No. His voice was barely above a whisper. She said it was just for the court filing. There is no court filing. Not yet. I stepped closer now. There is a probate hearing on November 15th, and whatever is inside that compartment, Claudia Holloway Reeves wants it badly enough to pay $12,000 break into my workshop and use my own apprentice against me. I watched him flinch at that last phrase, and I didn't soften it. My own apprentice, Sean. He set his coffee cup on the hood of the truck. It nearly tipped. He caught it without looking. Tell me everything she said to you, I told him. Every conversation, every detail. If she called you on a cell phone, I need to know which number. If she met you in person, I need to know where. She met me once, he said. In person, a cafe in Fairfield, November of last year. Good, I pulled out my phone. We're going to sit in Pete's office and you're going to tell me everything you remember. And Sean, I met his eyes and held them. If you leave one single thing out, I will know. I spent 4 years teaching you how to read wood grain for inconsistencies. I'm very good at spotting what doesn't fit. He nodded a small defeated motion. We walked toward the store together, gravel shifting under our feet. I kept my phone in my hand screen, dark, waiting. What he told me next inside that office made my blood run cold because Claudia hadn't just hired Sean once. She'd called him again, 3 weeks ago, and this time she hadn't asked for measurements. She'd asked for me. Pete's office smelled like sawdust and old coffee the same way it had smelled for 30 years. A battered metal desk took up most of the room, buried under invoices and wood sample catalogs, and two mismatched chairs faced each other across a strip of bare linoleum. I'd sat in the one closest to the door 100 times before usually talking over lumber prices or delivery schedules. This time, I sat with my phone face up on my knee and watched Sean Morrow lower himself into the opposite chair like a man preparing for a sentencing. Pete leaned in the doorway for a moment, then quietly pulled the door half shut behind him. He understood the shape of things without being told. He always had. "Tell me about the second call," I said. Sean folded his hands between his knees. He had a carpenter's hands, broad scarred across the knuckles, permanently stained at the cuticles from years of working with teak oil. I had taught him how to sand with the grain, how to feel when a joint was true without measuring it. Looking at those hands now made something ache behind my sternum. "She called on a Thursday," he said, 3 weeks ago. "Different number than before. I almost didn't pick up. She didn't say hello, just started talking. Said the situation had changed." "Changed how?" "She said the compartment needed to be opened before the hearing, not during. That whatever was inside couldn't come out in front of a judge." He paused. Her exact words were, "I need someone who can make it look like it was never touched." I kept my voice level. "And you said what?" "I said I wasn't a safecracker. I said she had the drawings." His eyes moved briefly to the window behind me, then back. "She said the drawings weren't enough, that the compartment had a secondary mechanism that wasn't on the plans, something that would trigger a lock seizure if the wrong sequence was used." He looked at me directly now. "She said only the person who built it would know the real opening order." The room felt very still. She knew, not guessed knew, which meant someone had told her. Someone who understood enough about my work to know I always built a secondary fail-safe into high-security commissions. A detail I had never written down. A detail I had demonstrated once at the Whitmore house in 2019 with one other person standing beside me. "Sean," I said slowly, "who else was with you when I installed the Whitmore compartment?" He didn't answer immediately, and the pause itself was the answer. "Tyler was there," I said. His jaw shifted. "He was interning with you that summer. I didn't think He was 17. I heard my own voice go flat. He carried the panel trim and handed me tools. I didn't think he was paying close attention. I pressed my thumb hard against the edge of my phone case. Apparently, he was. "Maggie, I don't think Tyler told her willingly. The way she talked about him," Sean stopped himself, seemed to choose his next words carefully. "She mentioned him. On the second call. She said she already had what she needed from the boy, but that she still required your hands. Those were her words. Your hands. The boy. Her own son. 22 years old in debt, and Claudia had already extracted what she needed from him and moved on to the next piece. The calculation of it was breathtaking. Did she make any threats? I asked. On the second call, explicit ones. Not toward you. He hesitated. Toward me. She said if I told anyone about the photographs, she had records of the payment in a form that would look like I'd stolen your client data and sold it. She had it structured so I'd look like the thief. She's thorough, I said mostly to myself. What does she want inside that compartment? Sean asked. His voice had shifted, less guilty now, more afraid. She's not doing all of this for furniture measurements. No, I agreed. She's not. I thought about what Tyler had told me in Pete's backlot 3 days ago. The recording. Harold Whitmore's voice on tape from some conversation Claudia had spent 6 years trying to bury. I didn't know yet what was on it, only that she would dismantle everything around her to keep it sealed. There's a recording, I said carefully. Something that implicates her in a decision that was made before Harold Whitmore died. If it surfaces at the probate hearing, her claim to the estate collapses. Possibly worse. Sean was quiet for a long moment. And the compartment is the only copy. The only physical copy as far as I know. He stood up abruptly, walked to the narrow window, and stood with his back to me, looking out at the gravel lot where his truck was parked. I watched the tension move across his shoulder blades. "I'll testify," he said finally. "Whatever you need. The calls, the payment, all of it. I'll go on record. I may take you up on that." I stood too. "But not yet. Right now, I need you to do something harder." He turned around. "I need you to call her back," I said. "When she contacts you again, and she will, I need you to tell her you found someone who can help open the compartment without triggering the secondary lock. Someone with access to my workshop and my tools." I held his gaze. "Someone she'll believe." He understood immediately. The color in his face shifted. "You want to set a trap?" he said. "I want to give her exactly what she thinks she wants," I said. "And I want a witness present when she takes it." The door creaked behind me. Pete's voice came through the gap, quiet and careful. "Maggie, there's someone in the front lot asking for you. Says his name is Jerry Novak." I hadn't called Jerry. I turned toward the door, and for the first time that morning, I felt something colder than anger settle across the back of my neck. Jerry Novak drove a white work van that had seen better decades. The magnetic sign on the side, "Novak and Sons Locksmith, Westport, Connecticut, established 1987, was peeling at one corner, curling back to show the gray primer beneath. I had known that van for 20 years, and every time I saw it in a driveway, it meant something. Either needed opening or something needed to stay shut. Right now, it was parked at an angle across two spaces in Pete's front lot, and Jerry was standing beside it with his hands in his jacket pockets and an expression on his face I didn't like at all. I pushed through the front door and walked toward him. Sean stayed inside. Pete stayed behind his counter. Whatever this was, it wasn't for an audience. "Jerry," I stopped a few feet away, "I didn't call you." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." "Then how did you know I was here?" He looked past me at the storefront for a moment, then back at my face. His eyes were the same pale gray they'd always been, but something in them was different this morning. Careful. Measuring. "Because I've been looking for you since yesterday," he said. "And this was the third place I tried." I crossed my arms. "Why were you looking for me?" He reached into his jacket, slow, deliberately visible the way men do when they want you to know they're not reaching for anything dangerous, and pulled out a small craft paper envelope, the kind you get at a hardware store when you cut a duplicate key. He held it out to me. I didn't take it immediately. "What is that?" "A key," he said. "Someone left it at my shop 2 weeks ago. Slid it through the mail slot in a plain envelope with your name written on it." He paused. "Not your address. Just your name." "Maggie." I took the envelope. It was light. I opened the flap and slid the key into my palm. Small, flat, brushed brass, with a distinctive bow cut in a shape I hadn't seen in years. Not a standard pin tumbler, not a modern security key. The shaft was thin, slightly irregular, with a secondary ridge cut along the lower edge that most people would mistake for a manufacturing flaw. It wasn't a flaw. "Jerry," I said quietly. "Has anyone else seen this?" "One person," he said, and the careful look in his eyes sharpened. "A man came into my shop about 10 days ago, said he was an insurance adjuster working on a property claim related to the Whitmore estate. He didn't show credentials I didn't ask, which I should have. He described this key in detail before he'd even seen it. Said he knew a key answering that description had been left in my possession, and he wanted to examine it as part of an investigation." The name came before I asked it. "Hargrove," Jerry said. "Victor Hargrove. He left a card." My hand closed around the key. Victor Hargrove. I had heard that name once before briefly from Arthur Finch, the estate lawyer who had mentioned in passing that Northeast Mutual had assigned an investigator to the Whitmore claim. Linda Pratt had told me Hargrove operated in the gray zone between insurance investigation and outright pressure, the kind of man companies hired when they wanted results without fingerprints. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I didn't know what he was talking about." Jerry's chin came up slightly. "I've been a locksmith in this town for 38 years, Maggie. I know the difference between a man conducting an investigation and a man running an errand for someone else." He looked at the key in my hand. "I also know what that key opens." I looked up. "It's a secondary release," he said. "Not a primary lock. It doesn't open the compartment directly. It bypasses a tension failsafe built into the secondary mechanism. Without it forcing the secondary trigger causes a seizure bolt to engage. He paused. Whoever built that compartment designed it so that anyone who tried to open it without knowing about the secondary release would permanently jam the lock. And with this key, the seizure bolt retracts. The secondary layer releases cleanly. He watched my face. Did you build it with that function? I looked at the key for a long moment. The brushed brass, the irregular shaft, the secondary ridge. Nope, I said. I didn't. The silence that followed was dense enough to lean on. Someone had modified the Whitmore compartment after I built it. Not the exterior, I would have seen that when I inspected the drawings. The interior mechanism. The part that wasn't visible, the part that only someone working from the inside of the wall cavity could access, which meant someone had opened the compartment at least once since 2019, made a modification, and closed it again without leaving a trace on the surface. When was the last time Harold Whitmore was seen in good health? I asked. Jerry frowned. I don't know. Sometime in 2023, I think. Before the diagnosis. And when did he change his will? He stopped. I don't know the exact date. February of 2024, I said, under duress according to his estate lawyer. I closed my fingers around the key again. Someone modified that lock between 2019 and early 2024, and they left this key eventually for me. I looked up at Jerry. They wanted me to be able to open it cleanly, which means they wanted what's inside to come out. Jerry was quiet for a moment. Then, so Harold built himself a way to make sure someone found it. I hadn't said Harold, but Jerry had arrived at the same answer I had, and he said it with the flat certainty of a man who'd spent 4 decades understanding how locks and the people who used them thought. Don't go home the usual way today, I told him. And don't answer if Hargrove calls again. He nodded once. What are you going to do with it? I slid the key back into the craft envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket beside my phone. I'm going to find out what Harold was trying to tell me, I said, before anyone else gets there first. Arthur Finch kept his office on the second floor of a converted Victorian on Post Road, the kind of building that looked like it had been arguing with modernity for 100 years, and winning. The staircase creaked on the 4th step. I knew because I had climbed it 3 times before once when Daniel and I updated our own wills twice for clients who needed an estate lawyer and trusted my recommendation. I counted the creak out of habit as I went up, and then I pushed open the door at the top and found Arthur standing behind his desk with his jacket already on, as though he had been expecting me to arrive before he was ready. Maggie. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, which was worse. You knew I'd come, I said. I was hoping you would. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit down. There are things I should have told you 3 weeks ago. I sat. I did not take off my coat. His office was orderly in the way that suggested controlled anxiety, every stack of folders squared at the edges, every pen parallel to the legal pad beside it. Arthur Finch had been practicing estates and probate law in Fairfield County for 31 years. He did not rattle easily. The fact that his hands moved to straighten an already straight folder the moment he sat down told me everything about his current state of mind. The hearing is November 15th, he began. I know the date, I said. Tell me what I don't know. He opened a folder and slid a single sheet across the desk. A photocopy, clean crisp, the header reading, Last Will and Testament of Harold James Whitmore, dated January 9th, 2024. 6 weeks before the will revision Claudia had allegedly forced in February. This is the original will, Arthur said. The one Claudia is contesting. She claims the February revision supersedes it. I believe the February document was signed under duress. He tapped the photocopied page. There is a clause in the original will, Section 7, Paragraph C, that most people have not read carefully. I looked at the paragraph he indicated. The language was precise and dry the way estate clauses always are, but the instruction inside it was not. Harold Whitmore had specified that in the event of any dispute over the authenticity of his final wishes, a sealed compartment described only as the built-in cabinet installed in the east study of the Westport property by M. Lowe Holloway licensed contractor in the spring of 2019, was to be opened only through a court-authorized evidentiary inspection with the estate executor present and the original craftsperson available to verify the mechanism. The contents were to be treated as supplementary testimony. I read it twice, then I set the page down. He named me specifically, I said, by your professional designation and the year of the commission. Arthur folded his hands. Harold was meticulous. He wrote this clause himself outside the presence of any other party. I witnessed it personally. Why didn't you contact me the moment the dispute was filed? He had the decency to hold my gaze when he answered. Because Eleanor asked me not to. She was concerned that if Claudia learned the clause existed before the hearing, she would find a way to access the compartment first. The name landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water. Eleanor Whitmore, I said. She's been in Westport since September. He paused. She asked me last week whether you'd been in contact with anyone connected to the estate. I told her I hadn't spoken with you. I didn't know at the time that other parties had already reached you. I thought about Tyler and Pete's backlot, Sean in the folding chair, the key in my coat pocket, the careful, terrible architecture of what Claudia had been building for months. Where is Eleanor now? I asked. She'd like to meet with you. Arthur opened a drawer and slid a note card across the desk, cream-colored handwritten in a tight, even script. An address on Campo Beach Road, a time 4 p.m. today. She wrote that before I called you this morning. She was fairly certain you'd be here before noon. She was right. I picked up the card. The handwriting was composed unhurried, the kind of penmanship that came from a generation that still practiced it. What does Eleanor know about what's inside the compartment? She knows it contains a recording, Arthur said carefully. She knows the recording documents a conversation that took place in March 2023 between Harold and a third party, in which Harold stated under his own volition that the February 2024 will revision was made under explicit pressure. He paused again. She does not know the identity of the third party on the recording. Harold told her only that it was someone whose voice, if recognized, would end the dispute immediately. I sat with that for a moment. A recording Harold had made himself. A clause Harold had written himself. A key modified by someone with access to the inside of the compartment, which meant Harold, in the months before his health failed, had rebuilt part of his own lock. He had been planning this for 2 years. Arthur, I said, if someone attempted to open that compartment before the hearing, with or without the correct sequence, and damage the contents in the process, would the court accept a certified description of what the recording contained in lieu of the physical recording itself? Arthur's expression shifted. That would depend on whether the description was given under oath by a credible witness. What if the craftsperson who built the compartment submitted an affidavit confirming tampering? He was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then the burden of proof shifts to the contesting party to explain the tampering. I stood and buttoned my coat. Draft the affidavit, I said. Leave the details blank for now. I'll fill them in before the 15th. I was at the door when he called after me. Maggie, Eleanor Whitmore, is 71 years old, and she has been protecting that compartment alone since Harold died. Whatever you think of the situation, she trusted Harold's plan. She's been waiting for the right person to walk through that door. He paused. I think she's been waiting for you. I didn't answer. I walked down the stairs, counted the creak on the 4th step, and stepped out into the October light with a note card in my pocket and a meeting at 4 o'clock that I intended to keep. Campo Beach Road in October has a particular quality of light, low amber coming in flat off the water and catching the edges of everything at an angle that makes ordinary things look significant. I had driven this stretch a dozen times over the years, usually on the way to or from a client on the shoreline. I had never stopped at the gray shingled house set back from the road behind a row of wind-bent cedars, number 114, with a flagstone path and no outdoor lights on despite the dimming sky. Eleanor Whitmore answered the door before I knocked. She was smaller than I expected. Photographs from the estate filing had suggested a woman of considerable presence, but in person, she was slight, fine-boned, dressed in a charcoal cardigan and dark trousers, her white hair cut close to her head. Her eyes were the sharp pale blue of sea glass. She looked at me the way people look at someone they've been expecting for a long time. "You're punctual," she said. "Harold always said a craftsperson who respected time respected materials." "He said that to me once," I told her, "the day I started on the East Study." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. "Come in." The sitting room faced the water. The last of the afternoon light came through tall windows and lay in strips across a Persian rug that had been there long enough to fade at the center. 2 cups of tea sat on the low table between the chairs. She'd made them before I arrived. "You know why I'm here?" I said once I was seated. "I know part of it." She lifted her cup with both hands. Steady. "I know Claudia has been moving against the estate for months. I know she found her way to your workshop somehow and to people connected to you." She paused. "I know she's frightened. People don't dismantle things carefully unless they're frightened. What is she frightened of?" I asked, though I already had an answer. I wanted hers. "Raymond Cross," Eleanor said, without hesitation. The name was exactly the one I'd been waiting for. "Tell me about him," I said. Eleanor set her cup down. She looked at the water for a moment, not evasive more, the way someone looks when they're deciding how far back to begin. "Raymond worked for us starting in 2017, estate manager officially. Harold trusted him with property, logistics, vendor, contacts, scheduling. He was competent and completely without loyalty." She said the last phrase with the precision of a woman who had revised it many times to get it exactly right. In the summer of 2021, Harold discovered that Raymond had been diverting funds from the household maintenance accounts, small amounts structured to avoid notice over 18 months, approximately $41,000 in total. "He was embezzling," I said. "Harold didn't report it to police." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Raymond came to him first. He had documentation fabricated but convincingly done that suggested Harold had been making informal payments to a third-party contractor without proper invoicing, the kind of paper trail that in the wrong context looks like tax fraud." She looked at me directly. Harold was 72 years old in reasonable health and had no interest in spending his remaining years in a legal proceeding, so he paid Raymond to leave and stay silent. A private settlement, no attorneys. 41,000 became what I asked. 85,000, she said. Cash transferred over 6 months. I thought about that number for a moment. Clean, private, untraceable, in the way that only matters until someone starts looking. And in March of 2023, I said slowly, Harold made a recording. He called Raymond, Eleanor said. He had learned by then that Raymond had surfaced again, this time connected to Claudia. We didn't know in what capacity, but Harold was ill by that point. The diagnosis was recent, and he understood what it meant for the estate timeline. She folded her hands in her lap. He called Raymond on his own phone. In the East Study, with the recording device running inside the compartment, he confronted Raymond about the 2021 payment. Raymond confirmed it, not knowing Harold was recording him. He also said something else. She stopped. "Eleanor," I said quietly. "What did he say?" He told Harold that Claudia had hired him to find the February will revision and verify that it superseded the original. She met my eyes. Harold had not yet changed his will in February of 2023. That revision came 11 months later, allegedly under Harold's free will. But Raymond's words in that recording from March of 2023 confirm that Claudia was planning the substitution nearly a year before it was executed. The sitting room felt very still. Outside, a gull crossed the window and was gone. "That recording proves premeditation," I said. "It proves Claudia was coordinating with Raymond to displace the original will before Harold's death." Eleanor's voice was even, practiced. She had lived with this knowledge for 2 years. It also proves Raymond committed extortion in 2021, which he confirmed on tape without knowing it. If that recording is played at the hearing, Claudia loses the estate claim. Raymond faces criminal exposure, and Harold's original intentions stand. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. Why did you wait? I asked. 2 years, Eleanor. You had this information. I had the knowledge that the information existed. She corrected me quietly. I never heard the recording. Harold told me it was inside the compartment and asked me not to try to retrieve it myself. He said the person who built it was the only one who should open it. She looked at me steadily. He was very specific about that. He said he'd built the key back in after he made his modification because he wanted the person who received it to be someone Claudia couldn't threaten. My phone buzzed again, Daniel a second time. You should answer that, Eleanor said. She was watching me with those sea glass eyes. It can wait, I said. Can it? She tilted her head slightly. He called me this morning, Mrs. Lowe Holloway. Your husband called this house at 9:15 and asked whether Harold Whitmore had left any documents related to a property transaction in 2019. She paused. I didn't know what to make of it. I still don't. I looked at the phone in my hand. Daniel's name on the screen glowing in the half-dark of the room. And for the first time since Tyler had pressed that envelope into my coat pocket a few days ago, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt afraid of the wrong person. I answered the phone. Not because I was ready, not because I had decided anything about Daniel in the 40 seconds his name had been glowing on my screen. I answered because Eleanor Whitmore was watching me with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite warning, and I have never been comfortable being read by someone I've just met. Daniel, I said, where are you? His voice was careful in a way it almost never was. Daniel Holloway had many qualities, but caution was not usually among them. He talked the way he moved forward without much checking of what was behind him. The careful voice meant he already knew the answer to his question. I'm finishing up, and I said, I'll be home in 30 minutes. A pause. Okay, I'll put something on the stove. He hung up before I could. I looked at Eleanor. She had returned her attention to the window, or was pretending to. The last of the light was going off the water, now leaving everything a flat, dark blue. Whatever he told you this morning, I said he didn't mean harm by it. I know, she said simply. That was clear. He sounded frightened. I picked up my coat from the arm of the chair. Don't open the door to anyone who isn't Arthur Finch before the 15th, and don't take calls from numbers you don't recognize. She nodded once. She didn't ask why. I was beginning to understand that Eleanor Whitmore had spent 2 years preparing for the kind of conversations that ended with instructions like that. The drive back took 25 minutes. I spent most of it with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, running through the geometry of what Daniel could and couldn't know. He knew about Eleanor, he'd called her. He knew about the Whitmore Commission, obviously. I'd worked on it for 6 weeks in 2019, and Daniel had driven me there twice when my truck was in the shop. He knew the project had involved a concealed compartment because I didn't keep professional secrets from my husband. What I didn't know was how much further his knowledge extended, and in which direction. The kitchen light was on when I pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I could see Daniel at the stove, his back to me, the unhurried movements of a man making soup from a habit he'd developed decades before he met me. He was wearing the gray sweater with the frayed left cuff that I had offered to repair 4 times. He had said no 4 times. Some things about a person you simply stop arguing with. I came in through the side door and set my bag on the bench. Sit down, I said. He turned from the stove. He had a wooden spoon in one hand and an expression that confirmed everything I needed to know before he said a word. Maggie. Sit down, Daniel. He sat. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat too. The soup was something tomato-based. I could smell the bay leaf from across the table. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening in October. Victor Hargrove came to the house, I said. It was not a question. His jaw shifted. 3 weeks ago, you were in New Haven for the Alderman Commission. What did he say? Daniel put the spoon on the counter behind him and turned back to face me. He was 72 years old, and he had the particular kind of tiredness that comes not from the day, but from carrying something too long. He said he was investigating an insurance claim on the Whitmore estate, that Northeast Mutual had reason to believe the compartment you built in 2019 contained materials relevant to a fraudulent policy modification. He paused. He said if the compartment was open during probate proceedings and the contents were found to relate to the fraud case, you would be named as a person of interest, because you built it, because you had access, because... He stopped. Because I'm the only one who can open it, I said. He made it sound like you'd be implicated just by being present at the opening. Daniel's voice tightened. He said the cleanest outcome for everyone was if the compartment remained sealed and the estate was settled through the contested revision. He was protecting Claudia's claim, I said. I didn't know that then. He met my eyes. Maggie, I swear to you I didn't know that. He presented it as a neutral investigation. He had a card and a case number. He spoke like a man doing paperwork. And so you called Eleanor Whitmore. His chin came up slightly defensive and guilty at once. I called her because I thought if anyone had standing to keep the compartment sealed without it becoming a legal proceeding, it was the widow. I thought I was protecting you. You called the one person whose entire hope for justice depends on that compartment being opened, I said. And you asked her to keep it shut. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't dissipate quickly. It settled into the room the way cold settles slowly, finding every gap. I didn't know what was inside it, he said. His voice had gone quiet. I still don't. You haven't told me. He was right. I hadn't. I had been carrying the pieces of this for 2 weeks, and I had not once sat down with my husband and laid them out. Partly because I hadn't understood the full shape of it myself, partly because some instinct I hadn't examined had told me to keep the boundaries clear. And that instinct I realize now had cost both of us something. A recording, I said. Harold made a recording that proves Claudia planned the will revision before he was ill enough to be pressured. If it's played at the hearing, her claim collapses. I watched his face. Hargrove works for her Daniel. Not for the insurance company. For her. He was very still. The case number, he said slowly. I wrote it down. It's in my desk. Get it, I said, right now. He stood, and for the first time in 3 weeks we were both facing the same direction. Daniel found the card in the third drawer of his desk tucked under a folded road map of coastal Connecticut that hadn't been used since we got smartphones. He set it on the kitchen table without a word and stood back while I examined it. It looked legitimate. That was the first thing. Heavy stock clean embossing the Northeast Mutual logo in the upper left corner, the right shade of navy blue, the right typeface. A direct phone number. A case reference printed in the lower right, NM-2025-FCE-0847. Victor Hargrove Sr., Claims Investigator, Fairfield County Division. I photographed both sides with my phone before I touched it further. Where did he park? I asked. Daniel frowned. The street, a gray sedan, I didn't note the plate. Did he come to the door or did he call ahead? He knocked. Said he'd tried to reach me by phone, but the number he had was outdated. Daniel paused. I offered him coffee. He declined. I turned the card over again. The paper stock was right. The logo was right. But the case number format was wrong. Northeast Mutual used a 6-segment reference for Fairfield County claims, not 5. I had handled enough estate commissions to have seen their documentation twice before. The difference was small enough that most people would never notice. Daniel had never had reason to notice. I need to make a call, I said. Go to bed. He looked at me steadily. Maggie, I'm not angry with you, I said, and I meant it. But I need 2 hours alone, and I need you not to answer the door or the phone until morning. Can you do that? He could. He did. Linda Pratt had given me her direct number in September, when Arthur Finch had connected us through a mutual contact in the Westport probate clerk's office. At the time, I hadn't been sure what to make of her former Connecticut State Police, 12 years on the Financial Crimes Unit, now leading the Fraud Investigation Division at Northeast Mutual's Bridgeport office. She'd called me once briefly to introduce herself and confirm she was aware of the Whitmore dispute. She had said, "If anything unusual comes your way, call me first. Not the local police, me." It was 11:40 at night. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "You knew about Hargrove. I've been building a file on Victor Hargrove for 6 months." Her voice was even unhurried, the tone of someone who had been waiting for a particular conversation to begin. "Where are you?" "Home. I have his card." "Don't handle it more than you already have. I'll send someone for it in the morning." A pause. "Tell me how he made contact," I told her. All of it, Daniel, the knock at the door, the coffee offer, the case number. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a brief silence that felt like note-taking. NM-2025-FCE-0847 does not exist, she said. Northeast Mutual has no investigator named Victor Hargrove. We have no open claim on the Whitmore estate. Our involvement in this case is entirely through my division fraud investigation, and we have not authorized any external contact with parties connected to the estate. I had expected it. Hearing it confirmed still landed with weight. "Who does he work for?" I asked. "A firm called Crestline Advisory Group, registered in Delaware, operating address in Stamford. On paper, they're a risk management consultancy." She paused. "In practice, they provide what the industry calls dispute resolution services for high net worth estate conflicts, meaning they apply pressure to cooperative parties and gather information through methods that tend not to hold up in court. Claudia hired them. Claudia's personal attorney retained Crestline 8 months ago. We traced the engagement through a payment structure that went through 2 shell accounts before landing on a registered invoice." Another pause. "This is not the first time Hargrove has worked a Fairfield County estate dispute. There were 2 prior cases, one in 2022, one in 2023. In both instances, a party opposing a contested will was approached by someone claiming insurance credentials and advised that cooperation would protect them from investigation. In both instances, the contested will was ultimately upheld in favor of Crestline's client." The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator running. "What happened to the opposing parties?" I asked. "One withdrew voluntarily. One held on but ran out of resources to continue the legal fight." Her voice was precise. "Hargrove doesn't threaten physically. He threatens financially and procedurally. He makes people believe they're about to become the subject of an investigation when in reality, no such investigation exists. By the time they verify the credentials, they've already made decisions they can't undo." "He almost worked on Daniel," I said. "He did work on Daniel," Linda said, not unkindly. "Your husband called Eleanor Whitmore. That was the intended outcome. If Eleanor had agreed to keep the compartment sealed, the probate hearing would have proceeded with only the contested revision on record. Harold's original will would have been challenged without the evidence inside that compartment to support it." I thought about Eleanor sitting alone in that gray-shingled house for 2 years, protecting something she had never even heard. Harold had trusted the plan to hold. It nearly hadn't. "I want to move forward," I said. "I have Sean Morrow ready to cooperate. I have Hargrove's card with his prints. I have a case number we can disprove. And I have a compartment that I can open on November 15th in front of a probate judge." "That's a strong position," Linda said. "But Hargrove knows you're getting close. He went to your husband because he'd already lost traction through Sean and through your workshop." She paused. "He'll try something more direct next." "How direct? Direct enough that you'll need something in place before he does." She was quiet for a moment. "I have an idea, but I need you to come to my office in the morning, and I need you to bring whoever you trust most in that workshop of yours." "Pete Garland," I said immediately. "Then bring Pete." A brief pause. "And Maggie, don't let your husband answer the door alone tomorrow. Not until we've had this meeting." I looked at the dark window above the kitchen sink. Somewhere outside, a car moved slowly along our street and didn't stop. "I'll be there at 9, I said. Linda Pratt's office was not what I expected. I had built a picture of her in my head over the past weeks, precise, institutional, the kind of person whose workspace reflected their methodology. What I found on the 4th floor of Northeast Mutual's Bridgeport building was a room that looked like a controlled explosion. 2 whiteboards covered in handwritten timelines, a corkboard running the full length of one wall pinned with photographs, printouts, and colored index cards connected by lines of red string. 3 monitors on the desk, 2 of them active, a half-eaten granola bar on a legal pad. She was standing when we came in, and she shook Pete's hand before mine. "Pete Garland," she said. "You reported an unusual customer inquiry to a colleague at the Westport Contractor Registry 14 weeks ago." Pete looked at me sideways. I didn't know anyone was listening. "Someone was," Linda said. "Sit down, both of you." We sat. Pete took the chair nearest the door, which was where Pete always sat in rooms he wasn't sure about. I took the one facing the corkboard and spent a moment reading the names pinned across it. Hargrove near the top, Claudia Holloway Reeves below him and to the left, Raymond Cross below her, lines connecting them in both directions. My own name was on the board. Lower right corner green card, no connecting lines yet. "You're building a case," I said. "I've been building it for 6 months." Linda sat on the edge of her desk. "What I've been missing is a provable point of contact between Hargrove and a party inside the estate dispute. Someone who can testify to direct communication, explicit instructions, and a financial transaction." She looked at me steadily. "You found that person." "Sean Morrow. Sean Morrow." She turned to the corkboard and tapped a blue card I hadn't noticed mid-level between Claudia and a blank space labeled Workshop Access. "Former apprentice, $12,000 payment photographic copies of the Whitmore compartment drawings. If he cooperates fully, we have the chain from Claudia's instruction to Hargrove's operation, to the physical breach of your files." She paused. "But a paper chain isn't enough. Claudia's attorney will argue Sean acted independently. We need Hargrove on record making direct contact with a party in the dispute, issuing instructions or offering inducement." "You want to record him," I said. "I want him to walk into a situation he believes he controls and say the things he always says." She moved to the second whiteboard, which had a rough floor plan sketched on it, a room, 2 entry points, a table in the center. "Sean calls Hargrove, tells him he has access to the Whitmore property, a scheduled maintenance visit routine, nothing that raises flags. He tells Hargrove the compartment can be accessed during that visit, that the craftsperson who built it has agreed to cooperate privately outside the probate process in exchange for being removed from the investigation." "You're offering him exactly what he wants," Pete said. He'd been quiet until now, studying the corkboard with the methodical attention of a man who measured twice before cutting. "He'll want verification. He'll want proof she's agreed." "That's where you come in, Mrs. Lowe Holloway," Linda said. I looked at the floor plan. "I'm the bait. You're the confirmation. There's a difference." She picked up a marker and drew a small circle at the table's center. "Sean arranges the meeting at a neutral location. I'd suggest the back room at Garland's Hardware, a space Hargrove has no prior association with. You're present. You tell him in your own words that you're willing to open the compartment before the hearing privately, and that you want your name removed from any insurance filing in exchange." She capped the marker. "He'll agree. Men like Hargrove always agree when they think they've won. The moment he articulates the terms, we have him on inducement and credential fraud." "And the recording," I said. "Connecticut. In-person meeting, you're a party to the conversation." She met my eyes. "Fully legal." Pete leaned forward. "What if he brings someone? We account for that." She nodded toward the floor plan. 2 points of entry, both covered. I'll have 2 investigators from my division positioned outside, and I'll be on audio from the adjacent room." She paused. "The goal is not arrest at the scene. The goal is a recording we can present to the state's attorney alongside the credential fraud documentation the shell company records and Sean's testimony. We build the full picture before we move." I looked at the floor plan for a long moment. The table at the center, the 2 doors, the small circle Linda had drawn where I would sit. When I asked, as soon as Sean makes contact. She glanced at her phone, which is why I'd like him here this morning if that's possible. I reached for my own phone. Pete had already beaten me to it. He had Sean's number from the morning in his back lot, and he was already dialing. The call connected on the third ring. I could hear the faint sound of Sean's voice through Pete's phone, thin and cautious. "Sean," Pete said, "we're in Bridgeport. You need to come now." A pause. Then Sean's voice again, lower this time, and something in the register of it made Linda stand up straight. Pete looked at me. "He says he already got a call this morning." He listened another second. "From Claudia. She wants the meeting arranged by Friday." Linda was already at her second monitor. Friday. She said more to herself than to us. She typed something, scanned the screen, typed again. Then she stopped. Her expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen from her before, not alarmed precisely, but focused with an intensity that told me something had just become more urgent. "There's a problem," she said. She turned the monitor to face us. On the screen was a still image from a surveillance feed, grainy timestamp 2 days ago exterior angle, Pete's hardware lot, 2 figures near a white van, Jerry Novak and me. And mounted in the upper corner of the frame, barely visible against the eave of Pete's building, a small black lens that I had never noticed before. "Hargrove already knows you have the key," Linda said. "Before I reveal what Claudia did next, something none of us saw coming, I need to know if you are still with me. Drop the number 13 in the comments right now, just that. It tells me you are here, and it means more than you know. One thing worth mentioning, what follows contains some fictional elements shaped for storytelling. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that is not the kind of story you want to hear, this is a good moment to step away. For everyone staying, let's continue." Sean arrived 19 minutes after Pete's call. He came through the office door with the look of a man who had been holding himself together with considerable effort and was beginning to feel the effort. His jacket was the same one from Pete's lot 3 days ago. He hadn't shaved. He stopped just inside the doorway when he saw Linda registered her the monitors, the corkboard, and then looked at me with an expression that asked a question he didn't say out loud. "She's on our side," I told him. "Sit down." He sat in the remaining chair, the one against the wall, and put both hands flat on his knees. Linda didn't offer pleasantries. "Tell me exactly what Claudia said this morning. Word for word, as close as you can get." Sean looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "She called at 7:53. I know because I checked after I hung up." He paused. "She said, 'The timeline has moved. I need the access arranged before the end of the week.' Same terms as discussed. But I'll be handling the final stage personally." "Personally," Linda repeated. "That's what she said." I asked what she meant. She said. He stopped, seemed to replay the call in his head. "I mean I'll be present when the compartment is opened. Not Victor. Me." The room was quiet for a moment. Pete shifted in his chair. I watched Linda's face, which gave very little away, but the slight tightening around her eyes told me she was recalibrating. "Did she give a reason?" Linda asked. I pushed her on it. Sean's jaw moved. "She said she had reason to believe the arrangements weren't being handled to her satisfaction. She didn't elaborate, but the way she said it." He glanced at me. It sounded like she was talking about Hargrove. "She's cut him out," Pete said. He said it with the flat certainty of a man stating a measurement. "Or she's sidelining him for this specific step," Linda said. She moved to the corkboard and stood in front of it with her arms crossed, looking at the lines connecting Claudia to Hargrove. After a moment, she unpinned the red string between them and let it hang loose. She retained Crestline for pressure work. She doesn't fully trust Hargrove with the end result, which tells us something important. She thinks he might negotiate for himself if the situation changes, I said. She thinks the recording is valuable enough that anyone who gets physically close to it becomes a liability. Linda turned from the board. Claudia Holloway Reeves is not an impulsive person. She planned the will revision 11 months in advance. She hired a fixer structured payments through 2 shell accounts and placed surveillance equipment near your workshop without leaving a direct trace. She looked at Sean. The fact that she's now inserting herself into the final stage tells me she's identified a weakness in her own plan. What weakness? Sean asked. I answered before Linda could. She doesn't know what else might be in the compartment. Everyone looked at me. The recording confirms Raymond's extortion and the premeditated will revision. I said. She knows that. She's known it since Harold died, which is why she's been fighting the probate. But Harold was meticulous. He named me specifically in the original will. He modified the lock himself. He left the release key through a channel that took months to reach me. I paused. A man who plans that carefully doesn't put one thing in a compartment. Linda studied me. You think there's more than the recording? I think Claudia thinks there's more than the recording. And I think that's why she can't let anyone else be the first pair of eyes inside that compartment. I looked at the floor plan still visible on the second whiteboard. She's not coming to witness the opening. She's coming to control what happens after it. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Denser. More considered. Pete spoke first. So the trap just got a bigger fish in it. And a more dangerous one, Linda said. She turned to the whiteboard and picked up the marker. We adjust. She drew a second circle beside the first at the table's center. Claudia present changes the evidentiary value significantly. Her direct participation in arranging the unauthorized pre-hearing access to a probate asset in front of witnesses on audio is no longer just inducement. It's obstruction. She capped the marker. In Connecticut, obstruction of probate proceedings carries up to 5 years. Sean had gone very still. She'll bring a lawyer. Probably not, I said. Not if she's cutting out Hargrove. She doesn't want documentation of her direct involvement. A lawyer creates a paper trail. I thought of Claudia at the Sunday dinner table, refilling bread no one had asked, for watching everything with the careful attention of someone who had learned early that the room was always a resource. She'll come alone or with Raymond. She's most comfortable when she's the smartest person present. Then we make sure she feels that way, Linda said. She looked at Sean. When you call her back, you confirm Friday. You tell her the location is a private workspace familiar to the craftsperson, no outside traffic. You tell her the craftsperson has agreed to the terms and will bring the release mechanism personally. She paused. Don't mention me, don't mention Pete, mention only Maggie. Sean nodded slowly, and when she asks why Maggie agreed, I leaned forward slightly. Tell her the truth. Tell her I want my name out of this investigation and I want it over before the 15th. I held his gaze. That part isn't even a lie. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. Okay. He took a breath. Okay, I'll call her this afternoon. Linda's desk phone rang. She glanced at the display and her expression shifted in a way I couldn't immediately read. Not alarmed, not pleased. Something in between. She picked up, listened for 10 seconds, and set the phone down. That was Arthur Finch, she said. Raymond Cross called his office this morning. She looked at me directly. He wants immunity in exchange for full testimony. She paused once cleanly. And he says he has a second recording. Raymond Cross chose the meeting place himself. A diner on Broad Street in Bridgeport, the kind that had been there since before the highway was built and showed no interest in updating to acknowledge the fact. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, a counter with 6 stools and a coffee urn that looked older than I was. Linda had agreed to the location without argument, which told me she had already assessed it and found it acceptable. We took the booth farthest from the door. Raymond was already seated when we arrived, a cup of coffee in front of him, both hands visible on the table, in the deliberate way of a man who had spent time around people trained to notice hands. He was not what I expected. I had constructed Raymond Cross from the evidence of what he had done, the embezzlement, the fabricated documentation, the $85,000 extracted from a 72-year-old man who only wanted to spend his remaining years in peace. I had expected someone harder, sharper, the kind of person whose damage announced itself in the way they moved. Instead, I found a man who looked tired in a bone-deep way with careful eyes, and the kind of stillness that comes not from confidence, but from having thought very hard about how to get through the next few hours without making anything worse. Mrs. Lowe Holloway, he said, I know you have no reason to trust me. I don't. I agreed. I slid into the booth across from him. Linda sat beside me. But you called Arthur Finch, which means you want something from the probate process. Tell me what you have. He reached into his jacket, same deliberate visibility as before, and set a small digital recorder on the table, the kind used for meeting notes. Nothing distinctive about it. He pushed it a few inches toward Linda. July 19th of this year, he said. Claudia Holloway Reeves. My phone, her voice, a conversation she initiated. Linda looked at the recorder without touching it yet. What were the circumstances? She called to discuss what she described as a timing adjustment to the plan. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. She had become concerned that the hearing date was closer than originally anticipated and that Hargrove had not made sufficient progress in discouraging the parties opposing the contested revision. He paused. She named your husband specifically. She said Hargrove was going to make contact with Daniel Holloway and that I was to provide him with background information on your professional history, your client list, your commission records, anything that would make the implication of fraud more credible. I kept my voice level. You gave Hargrove my client records. I gave him 3 names from a contractor registry that's partially public record, nothing that wasn't already accessible. He met my eyes. I want that noted. Noted, Linda said. Her tone did not indicate whether it would help him. Did Claudia say anything else on the recording? She said. He stopped, seemed to consider the precise phrasing. She said that if the compartment was opened at the hearing and the contents were what Harold had told her they were, she would lose not only the estate, but her freedom. Those were her exact words, her freedom. He looked down at the recorder. That's when I started keeping records. Because you knew she'd sacrifice you to protect herself, I said. He didn't deny it. We had an arrangement that dated to 2022. She'd found out about the 2021 settlement with Harold I don't know how. She approached me and made it clear that she could report the original embezzlement at any time, which would expose the private settlement and Harold's decision not to report it and reframe the entire thing as a conspiracy between us. He shook his head slightly. It wasn't a conspiracy. Harold paid me to go away. I went away. But the documentation in the wrong hands looks like mutual fraud. So she had leverage over you, Linda said. And she used it. For 3 years. His jaw tightened. I helped her identify the right attorney to draft the February revision. I confirmed that Harold's mental state was being documented by his physician in a way that could be used to argue competence. I stayed available when she needed background information on estate procedures. He paused. I did not help her access the compartment that I want on record. Why not? I asked. You helped with everything else. He looked at me directly. Because Harold asked me not to. In the March 2023, call the one on the recording inside that compartment after he confronted me about the original payment, he said something I didn't expect. He stopped for a moment, and something in his expression shifted into territory I hadn't seen yet. Not guilt exactly. Something older and less easily named. He said he wasn't recording me to destroy me. He said he was recording the conversation because he needed the truth preserved, and the only person he trusted to build the container for the truth was the same person he trusted to open it. He said if I wanted to make something right before the end, I could start by not interfering with the lock. The diner moved around us plates, clearing coffee, refilling a conversation at the counter about the weather. And you didn't interfere, I said. I didn't interfere with the lock. He pushed the recorder another inch toward Linda. Everything on that device is yours. The July conversation, 2 follow-up calls in August, and a text exchange from September in which Claudia confirmed Hargrove's assignment to approach your husband. He looked at Linda. I want immunity for the 2021 settlement and for my cooperation with Claudia's plan. Full testimony in exchange. I'll take the stand if required. Linda picked up the recorder. She turned it over once in her hand, then set it beside her notepad. I'll need to verify the audio before I can make any representations, she said. But if the content matches what you've described, she glanced at me briefly. Then yes, we can discuss terms. Raymond nodded. He looked like a man who had put something down that had been very heavy for a very long time. I reached for the coffee I hadn't ordered. A server appeared from nowhere and poured it without being asked the way good diner staff always do. And for a moment, the ordinary mechanics of the world reasserted themselves so completely that the thing I said next surprised even me. "Raymond," I said, "did Harold know you'd help in the end?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. He told me on that call. He said finally that he didn't need me to be good. He just needed me to be afraid of the right thing at the right time. A pause. He was usually right about people. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Broad Street and rattled the window in its frame. Friday was 3 days away. Sean called at 6:17 Thursday evening. I was in the workshop not working, sitting on the stool beside the flat file cabinet with the craft paper envelope on the bench in front of me, turning the brass key over in my fingers the way I sometimes turned a problem joint looking for the angle that made it make sense. I had been there for 40 minutes. The light outside the single workshop window had gone from amber to gray to nothing. She confirmed, Sean said. 2 o'clock tomorrow, Pete's back room. A pause. She asked if the location had exterior cameras. What did you tell her? I told her Pete's a 67-year-old hardware store owner who still uses a paper receipt book. She accepted that. Good. I set the key down on the bench. Did she say anything about bringing anyone? She said she'd come alone. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone reporting information they don't fully believe. I don't think she will. Neither do I. I looked at the key. Get some sleep, Sean. Be at Pete's by noon tomorrow. Don't park in the front lot. He said he would. He hung up. I sat in the workshop for another few minutes listening to the particular silence of a space full of tools that weren't being used, wood and linseed oil, and the faint metallic undertone of the bench vise. I had spent more hours in this room than in any other place I'd lived in my life, and for the first time in 30 years, it felt like a room I might not be able to simply return to when this was over. I turned off the light and went inside. Daniel was at the kitchen table when I came in, which meant he had been waiting. He had a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't touched. "Tell me the plan," he said. I hung my coat on the hook by the door. "I've told you the outline. I want the details." I looked at him across the kitchen. He was wearing the gray sweater again, the one with the frayed cuff, and the kitchen light caught the lines of his face in a way that reminded me with a clarity I didn't particularly want right then that he was 72 years old and had spent 3 weeks carrying a fear he hadn't known how to name. I sat down across from him and told him everything. The meeting at 2 o'clock, Pete's back room, Linda in the adjacent space with audio running, Sean as the confirmation point, 2 investigators outside both exits, the evidentiary goal, Claudia on record authorizing unauthorized pre-hearing access to a probate asset. He listened without interrupting, which was not his natural state. When I finished, he said, "I want to be there." "No." "Maggie." "Daniel." I kept my voice even. "You're not trained for this. Your presence changes the dynamic in a room where the dynamic is the only tool we have. And if something goes sideways, I need to know exactly where you are." He looked at his water glass. "That's a careful way of saying you don't want to be worried about me." "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what it is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's my daughter." I didn't answer immediately, because there was no answer to that which was both true and kind. "She's been your daughter for 44 years, I said finally, "and she's been planning this for at least 2 of them. Those 2 facts can both be true, Daniel. One doesn't cancel the other." He picked up the water glass and set it down again without drinking. "What happens to her?" he asked. "If everything goes the way Linda wants, that depends on what she says tomorrow and what the state's attorney decides to do with the recordings." I folded my hands on the table. Obstruction of probate proceedings, possible conspiracy charges depending on how the Hargrove connection is characterized. I paused. "She'll have legal representation. She'll have options. What she does with them is her choice, not yours and not mine." He nodded slowly. the nod of a man accepting something he had already known was coming. My phone rang at 9:43. Number I didn't recognize. Connecticut area code Fairfield County prefix. I knew before I answered. Mrs. Lowe Holloway. Victor Hargrove's voice was exactly what the card had suggested, measured professional, with a faint undertone of something that wanted to be mistaken for courtesy. I think we should talk before tomorrow. Daniel looked at me. I held up one hand, wait, and stood moving toward the back hallway. I don't believe we have anything to talk about, I said. I think you'll find we do. A pause calibrated for effect. I know about the meeting at Garland's Hardware. I know Linda Pratt will be present. I know you're planning to record the conversation. Another pause. What I don't think you fully considered is what happens after. Claudia Holloway Reeves has attorneys in 3 states, Mrs. Lowe Holloway. One recorded conversation in a hardware store back room, even a clean one, is a long way from a closed probate case. I kept my voice level. Is that a threat or a forecast? It's a professional observation. The courtesy undertone thickened slightly. Walk away from tomorrow. Let the hearing proceed on its current trajectory. I can make certain that your name appears nowhere in the Northeast Mutual filing, which I'll remind you is the outcome you actually want. You can't make certain of anything, I said, because there is no Northeast Mutual filing. There is no case number, and there is no Victor Hargrove, Senior Claims Investigator, Fairfield County Division. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. I know what Crestline Advisory Group is. I know what you are. And I know you're calling me tonight because you've run out of other options. The silence on the line lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Tomorrow, he said, will not go the way you think it will. No, I agreed. It probably won't. Things rarely do. I looked back toward the kitchen where Daniel was sitting very still with his hands around a glass of water. That's why you prepare carefully and you trust the people beside you. I ended the call. I stood in the hallway for a moment, phone in hand, feeling the particular stillness that comes after a decision has fully resolved into certainty. Not calm precisely. Something past calm. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down. Hargrove, Daniel said. He knows about tomorrow. I set the phone on the table. He's bluffing. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. How do you know? Because he called me, I said. If he had something real, he wouldn't need to. Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Outside, the October wind moved through the cedar hedges along the back fence, a sound I had heard 10,000 times from this kitchen. I listened to it until my coffee went cold, and then I went to bed, and I did not sleep well, and I did not expect to. I arrived at Pete's at 11:40. Linda's 2 investigators were already in position, one in a panel van on the service road behind the building, one inside the storeroom adjacent to the back room, separated from us by a wall, thin enough to hear through without assistance. Linda herself was already in the storeroom when I arrived, a compact audio unit on the shelf beside her, a single earbud in her left ear. She looked at me through the half-open connecting door and nodded once. I nodded back and pulled the door closed. Sean was at the work table in the center of the back room, hands around a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from. Pete was behind the counter at the far end, ostensibly reorganizing a rack of drill bits. The room smelled like sawdust and machine oil, the same as it always did, and I found that steadying in a way I hadn't expected. She texted 20 minutes ago, Sean said. She's coming from Stamford, should be here by 2. Raymond, I asked. She didn't mention him. I set my bag on the end of the work table and took out the brass key. I placed it on the table where it could be seen. Then I sat down and waited. Claudia Holloway Reeves arrived at 1:58. She came through the back entrance alone, which lasted exactly 4 seconds before Raymond Cross followed her through the door. He didn't look at me immediately. He looked at the floor, then at the table, then briefly, barely perceptibly at the wall to my left where the connecting door to the storeroom was. He knew exactly what was behind it. Claudia did not appear to notice. She was dressed in the kind of careful, understated way that communicates confidence to people who understand clothing and nothing to people who don't. Dark blazer. No jewelry, hair pulled back. She surveyed the room in the same way I had watched her survey Sunday dinner tables, quickly completely cataloging every variable. Her eyes settled on the key. "Mrs. Lowe Holloway." Her voice was composed, warm even in a surface way. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." "I want this finished," I said. "That's all." She pulled out the chair across from me and sat. Raymond remained standing near the door. Sean stayed at his end of the table, not speaking. "Then we want the same thing," Claudia said. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. If the compartment is opened in a formal proceeding, everything inside it becomes part of the public record." She folded her hands on the table. "That doesn't benefit either of us." "How does it not benefit me?" I asked. "Harold named me in his will specifically to open it." "Harold named you because he trusted you," she said. "But trust doesn't protect you from what happens after the contents become evidence. You built that compartment. You had access to it for 6 years. If a recording surfaces that implicates parties in a legal dispute, investigators ask who else could have tampered with it." She tilted her head slightly. "You've already had contact from the insurance investigation." "I know what Hargrove is," I said. Something shifted in her expression, very small, very fast. She recovered it immediately, but I had been watching for it. "Then you understand the exposure," she said. "I understand that you sent him to my husband," I said, "and that the case number he presented was fabricated, and that Crestline Advisory Group is registered in Delaware and has no standing in any Connecticut insurance proceeding." The room was very still. Claudia looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Raymond and something passed between them, or she thought it did. "You've been thorough," she said finally. Her voice had dropped the warmth entirely. What was underneath it was not hostile precisely. It was something colder and more considered. "You've clearly spoken to people who've given you information about my arrangements. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." She leaned forward slightly. "But here's what those people haven't told you, because they don't know it. That recording, Harold's recording, doesn't only implicate me." I waited. "Harold documented more than one conversation," she said. "Some of those conversations include exchanges that would be uncomfortable for Eleanor Whitmore, about the estate valuation, about certain agreements made before Harold's diagnosis." She paused. "If the compartment opens in open court, Eleanor is exposed too. I doubt she mentioned that to you." "Did Harold tell you what was in the recording?" I asked. "Harold told me in February of 2023 that he had documentation that would protect the estate from interference," she said. His word, interference. Her jaw tightened. I knew then that he was talking about me. The words landed and kept falling. February 2023. Harold had told her in February. The will revision, the contested one, was dated February 2024, nearly a year later, which meant she had known for 12 months before she moved. She had sat with that knowledge for an entire year and then acted, and she had just said all of it out loud. Raymond Cross pushed off the wall. "Claudia," his voice was flat, warning. She turned to look at him. "Don't," he said. She looked back at me, and I watched the precise moment she understood what she had walked into. It moved across her face like a shadow crossing ground, not panic, because Claudia Holloway Reeves was not a person who panicked, but something that looked like the sudden awareness of a structural failure, the kind a carpenter recognizes when what appeared solid has been undermined from beneath. "The wall," she said quietly. Not a question. I didn't answer. The connecting door opened. Linda stepped through, first audio unit in hand, both investigators behind her. "Ms. Holloway Reeves," Linda said, "I'm going to need you to stay seated. We have some questions about your arrangements with Crestline Advisory Group and about a statement you just made regarding your knowledge of Harold Whitmore's documentation in February of 2023. Claudia sat very still. She did not look at Raymond. She did not look at Sean. She looked at me, and in her expression was something I had not seen there before. Not on Sunday dinner evenings, not in the parking lot when Tyler had pressed the envelope into my coat, not in any version of Claudia I had constructed across the months of this. She looked for the first time like someone who had miscalculated the person across the table. "You'll want an attorney," I said. Arthur Finch can recommend someone. He's very good at connecting people with what they need. I picked up the brass key from the table and closed my hand around it. Pete made coffee after Linda left with Claudia. Nobody asked him to. He simply moved to the small machine in the corner of the back room, filled it, and stood with his back to the rest of us while it ran, and the sound of it, that ordinary domestic gurgle, was the thing that finally allowed the room to breathe again. Sean sat down on the edge of the work table. He put his face in his hands for a moment, not dramatically, just the way a person does when they've been holding themselves in a particular shape for too long, and the shape is no longer required. "She really came," he said, into his hands mostly. "She really came," I said. Linda had been professional and precise in those final minutes, identifying herself, fully stating the nature of the recording, advising Claudia of her rights in the measured tone of someone who had done this before and found no satisfaction in it. Claudia had not raised her voice. She had asked once for the name of the supervising attorney at Northeast Mutual's legal division, and Linda had provided it. Then she had stood smooth the front of her blazer and walked out of Pete's back room with the composure of a woman who was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Raymond had gone separately with the second investigator under a different understanding entirely. I stayed until the room emptied. Then I picked up my bag, put the brass key back in my coat pocket, and drove home. Daniel was in the living room. Not the kitchen, the living room, which meant he had been waiting somewhere less functional, somewhere he could see the driveway. He stood when I came through the door. I didn't give him the overview first. I sat down on the couch and said, "It worked. She's in Linda's custody for questioning. The audio is clean." He sat back down in the armchair across from me. His hands were on his knees. He was very still in the way that people are still when they are working hard not to show what they are feeling. "Did she say anything?" he asked. "When Linda came in." "She asked for an attorney referral," I said. "She was composed." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man trying to decide how to carry something that doesn't have a comfortable shape. "She's still my daughter," he said. "I know. I know you know." He looked at his hands. "That doesn't make it easier to hear." I moved from the couch to the arm of his chair and sat beside him, which was not a thing I did often. I was not by nature a person who communicated primarily through physical proximity, but some moments call for a different grammar than words. We sat like that for a while. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up off the sound and was moving through the cedars in a way that meant rain before morning. My phone buzzed. Tyler. I looked at the screen for a moment, then answered. "I heard," he said. His voice was steadier than I expected, older sounding than his 22 years usually allowed. "Sean texted me." "Tyler, I need to say something." A pause. "I need to say it before you tell me it's okay, because I don't think it is okay and I don't want you to pretend it is." I waited. "I knew what she was doing," he said. "Not all of it. Not Hargrove, not Sean, not the workshop, but I knew she was working against the estate. I knew she'd been in contact with someone connected to the Whitmore property. I found emails on a shared family account she'd forgotten I had access to back in the spring." His voice was careful and quiet. "I didn't go to anyone because I didn't know who to go to, and because she's my mother, and I kept thinking she'd stop." "But she didn't stop," I said. "She accelerated," he said. "And the night of the dinner when I put that envelope in your coat, that wasn't fear. I want you to know that. I wasn't afraid of her." He stopped for a moment. "I was afraid of what would happen if no one who could actually do something didn't find out in time. You built that compartment. Harold named you. I'd read that clause in the original will when I was helping Grandpa Daniel sort some estate documents 2 summers ago." A pause. "I knew you were the right person. I just didn't know how to say it without—" He stopped again. "Without destroying your family," I said. "Yes," he said quietly, "without destroying what was left of it." I thought about a 22-year-old carrying that weight across months. The Sunday dinner where he'd tracked Claudia's position across the table, timed his moment to within a 30-second window, pressed an envelope into a coat pocket, and walked back to his seat without breaking stride. "You didn't destroy anything, Tyler," I said. "She made her choices. You made yours. Those aren't the same." He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was very young again briefly. "Is Grandpa Daniel okay?" I looked at Daniel sitting beside me, still hands on his knees facing something that had no good angle. "He will be," I said. "Give him time." I called Eleanor last. She answered on the first ring as though she had been holding the phone. "It's done," I said. "The audio is clean. Linda has what she needs." A silence that was not empty, full rather in the way that silences are when something long held is finally set down. "Harold would have said something measured and practical right now," she said. "He was very good at that." "What would he have said?" Another pause. "He would have said, 'Now you can open it properly.'" Her voice was steady but thin at the edges, the way old wood is thin at a long edge, still holding but showing the years. November 15th, Mrs. Lowe Holloway. "I'll be there." "So will I said. I ended the call and sat for a long time in the quiet living room with Daniel beside me and the rain beginning to move in off the sound tapping first at the kitchen window and then at all of them. And I held the brass key in my closed hand and thought about Harold Whitmore sitting alone in his East study 2 years ago, building a plan out of the only materials he had left time and trust and a locked room and the right person's name written in his will. He had been right about the person. I hoped I was right about what came next. The 15th of November arrived the way important days often do quietly, without announcement looking on the surface exactly like the day before it. I was up at 5:30. Daniel was still asleep. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the early light come in, flat and gray off the sound, the kind of November light that doesn't warm anything but makes the edges of things very sharp and clear. I had laid out what I needed the night before the release key on a small square of chamois cloth, my carpenter's leather folio, with the original commission paperwork from 2019 and the note card Eleanor had written in her tight, even script 4 p.m. today, which I had kept in my coat pocket for 6 weeks and which I set now on the counter beside my coffee cup, though I no longer needed it for the address. I knew where I was going. Arthur Finch met me at the Whitmore estate at 9 o'clock. He was standing at the front door when I arrived already in his court jacket holding 2 cups of takeout coffee, with the careful grip of a man who understood that some mornings required practical gestures. He handed me one without comment, which I appreciated. Eleanor opened the door before either of us knocked. She was dressed simply dark wool, her white hair precise, the sea-glass eyes calm, in a way that I understood now was not the absence of feeling, but the long practice of carrying feeling without letting it decide things. She looked at the leather folio under my arm. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. The east study was at the back of the house, north-facing with tall windows that looked onto a November garden, gone mostly to seed. The room smelled of old paper and the particular dry warmth of a space that had been kept at a careful temperature for years. The built-in cabinet was against the interior wall, mahogany-faced floor to ceiling, indistinguishable from the surrounding millwork unless you knew what you were looking at, which was the point. Linda Pratt was already in the room, standing near the window. She nodded when I came in. I set my folio on Harold's writing desk and took out the release key. "For the record," Arthur said, opening his own folder, "I'm documenting this opening as requested under Section 7, Paragraph C of the original will of Harold James Whitmore, dated January 9th, 2024, in the presence of the estate executor, the original craftsperson of record, and 2 designated witnesses." He looked up. "Proceed when ready, Mrs. Lowe Holloway." I stood in front of the cabinet. The surface was exactly as I had left it in 2019, not a mark, not a scratch, the grain running true and uninterrupted. I ran my fingers along the lower right panel in the specific sequence I had taught my hands over 6 weeks of installation, 3 inches from the corner light pressure, then a quarter rotation of the release key in the concealed slot beneath the decorative molding. The secondary lock disengaged with a sound no louder than a watch ticking. The panel shifted inward 2 millimeters. I exhaled slowly and opened it. Inside, in a shallow cavity lined with the same acid-free material I used for document storage, were 2 items. The first was a digital recorder, small matte black, a strip of white tape across the front in Harold's handwriting, March 14th, 2023. The second was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with 2 words on the front in the same tight hand for Maggie. I stood very still for a moment. Arthur reached past me carefully and took the recorder. His hands were steady. Eleanor was watching from near the door, and whatever she felt in that moment, she kept in that space behind her sea-glass eyes, where she kept most things. I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it in the East study. I opened it in Arthur's car parked in the Whitmore driveway, while the others went inside to call the probate court and confirm the evidence was secured. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, dated November 2023, 4 months before Harold died. He wrote the way he apparently did everything precisely without ornamentation, with a directness that made the words feel spoken rather than written. Mrs. Lowe Holloway, it began. If you are reading this, then the room held and you found the key, and you were not frightened off by whatever was arranged to frighten you. I suspected someone would try. I built the room to outlast them. He wrote about the compartment, not the mechanics of it, but what it had meant to him to watch it built. He had stood in the East study on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2019 and watched a carpenter he had never met measure a wall cavity with the unhurried attention of someone who understood that the difference between something that held and something that failed was always in the preparation that no one saw. He had decided then, he wrote, that if he ever needed a place to keep something true, this was the room, and this was the person. I don't know what it cost you to get here, he wrote near the end. I imagine it cost more than it should have. Things that are worth doing usually do. What I can tell you is that the compartment did what a good compartment does. It kept what mattered safe until the right person arrived to open it. I think that is also, in some smaller way, what people try to do for each other. Keep what matters safe until it can be said out loud. Thank you for building it well. I sat in the car for a long time after I finished reading. The probate hearing took 4 hours. Harold's recording was played in full. Raymond Cross testified under his immunity agreement. Linda presented the audio from Pete's back room. Arthur submitted the affidavit. The judge presiding was a woman of about 60 with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she listened to all of it with the patient, unyielding attention of someone who had decided nothing in this room would be rushed. Claudia's attorney requested a recess twice. Both times, the judge denied it. At 3:40 in the afternoon, the court upheld Harold's original will. Claudia had entered a negotiated plea on the obstruction charge the previous week. Her attorney had been very good, and the sentence reflected it: probation, a financial penalty, mandatory forfeiture of the estate claim. She would not serve time. I did not know how Daniel felt about that. I suspected he felt several things at once and had decided to feel them slowly in private over a long period which seemed reasonable. Tyler had called me the night before the hearing. He had asked if I thought his mother would be okay. I had told him I thought she would have the opportunity to be, which was the truest answer I had. Eleanor Whitmore left the courthouse at 4:15. She paused on the steps, turned her face up briefly toward a sky that had gone pale silver, and then looked at me. "Come for tea sometime," she said, "when things are quieter." "I will," I said, and I meant it. I was back in my workshop by 6. Daniel had left the light on for me, the workshop light, which he knew I preferred to the house lights when I was settling back into something. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the smell of it, wood and linseed and the cold undertone of the November night coming through the gap under the door. I hung up my coat. I put the release key in the small cedar box on the upper shelf where I kept things that had earned their place. I unrolled a length of quarter-sawn white oak across the bench, a new commission, a client in Fairfield, a built-in for a study not unlike Harold's in proportion. I picked up my measuring tape. I made the first mark, and I began. Looking back now, I think the most dangerous thing about family betrayal isn't the betrayal itself. It's how long you tell yourself it isn't happening. I waited. I second-guessed. I protected people who were already protecting themselves at my expense. If I could say one thing to anyone standing where I once stood, it would be this: don't do what I did. Don't carry the envelope alone for weeks. Don't assume the people you love most are automatically safe to trust. Don't wait for the damage to become undeniable before you decide you deserve to know the truth. Family revenge is a trap that looks like justice. I've seen what it costs not just the person it's aimed at, but everyone standing nearby. Claudia wanted what she believed was owed to her, and in chasing it, she burned through her son, her father, and every relationship she might have repaired. That's not strength. That's fear wearing the mask of control. What saved me, and I say this plainly without embarrassment, was not my preparation, not my skills, not the people standing outside that door. It was something quieter. I believe God puts the right person in the right room at the right moment. Sometimes the room is a workshop. Sometimes the moment is an ordinary Tuesday, and you don't know until years later why you built something so carefully that no one asked you to. Family betrayal leaves marks. So does choosing to be the person who tells the truth anyway. My personal opinion, family revenge solves nothing. Accountability does. And the difference between those two things is everything. If this story made you feel something, leave it in the comments. I read everyone. If someone you know needs to hear it, pass it along. And if you want to be here when the next story begins, you already know what to do. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle note before you go: the stories ahead contain fictional elements built with care and with the single purpose of giving us something true to think about. If that is not what you are looking for right now, there is no obligation to step away and find what serves you better. For those of you who are staying, I will see you in the next one.